Therapy is really important, but I don't think it's a cure all for everything either. Whenever the topic of mental health is brought up, there's always a bombardment of people saying, oh, just go to a therapist, just go to a therapist. And yeah, that's the obvious answer, but as someone who's been in therapy for over 7 years, there's just some things that therapy and psychiatry cannot fix. For most of the time while I was living with my abusers, I was seeing a therapist. And honestly, it was not that helpful. I would tell my therapist about how scared I was and about all the horrible things that the adults who were supposed to protect me were doing to me. And instead of trying to help me and get me out of that situation, or even give me coping mechanisms, or even just tell me that what's happening to me isn't my fault. But no, instead, I would just get diagnosed with a bunch of different things and then get put on a bunch of different heavy medications that a child should have never been on. And the meds didn't do anything for me except make me more docile and more tolerant against the abuse, which wasn't really helpful for me, maybe for my abusers though. Therapy was helpful in the way that I could leave the house and not come back for a while, but I feel like that's about the extent of it. I'd tell my therapist about all the horrible things that were happening to me, about how horrible I felt about myself because I was being belittled by my own parent every single day, and nothing was done to help me. No reports were made. She didn't help me at all with like trying to build back my self-esteem or trying to make my inner voice nicer to myself. There's no safety plan about what to do if my dad got too violent. All the steps that should have been there were not there. For years, I did the talk therapy. I did the medications, and instead of getting better, I just got worse and worse. Not necessarily because these things don't work, but because nothing was being done to address the root issue. The reason that I was struggling so much. And that was because I was being abused. I was being neglected. My needs weren't being met. A child growing up in a horrible upbringing is obviously not gonna act like a typical child. And I think it's really wild that they just so easily diagnose and then heavily medicate children in abusive households. Like, obviously, the kids are gonna act out. I don't think that necessarily means that they have a mental health issue, though. Because, yeah, hiding in my room all day as a kid is probably a typical sign of depression, but when you take into account that my therapist knew that I was so terrified of my dad that I didn't want to leave my room, it is that a sign of depression? And then eventually that fear morphed into actual depression that I had to suffer with for the next 9 years. It got so bad that there are many times that I almost lost my life. And the only thing that helped relieve that depression was getting away from my abusers and getting into a safe environment where I could finally heal. There's no amount of drugs or therapy that's gonna make you feel better about living somewhere that constantly breaks you down. After I left, I was able to start rebuilding my habits into healthier ones, and most importantly, rebuilding the inner voice in my head that had become literally just a bully. And obviously, you're gonna feel kind of bad about yourself when you have a little menace in your head following you around being horrible to you. Now that I've finally been out of that situation, the darkness that's been looming over my head since I was a small child is finally clearing. I finally I finally have a will to live. I finally want to be here. I finally want to put effort into my life, and I have the motivation to do that. This wasn't from medications or triangle breathing methods taught by my therapists. This was from changing my life and getting rid of the things that were ultimately depressing me. Therapy and medication are very beneficial, but they're not just a magic cure-all to every circumstance in life. Sometimes there are situations that are going to make you feel like shit until you're out of them.